Way back yonder when the West was young, a cowboy's work was never done. The leather in his boot was real, the spur would jangle on his heel, and all day long in the blazing sun, a cowboy wore a Stetson.
Stetson, the legendary Stetson. It all began back in the 1850s when John B. Stetson left the eastern coast and headed west. And it was during this trek that he created the first cowboy hat. Broad of brim and high-crowned, it attracted so much attention that he eventually sold it to a bullwhacker for a $5 gold piece. By 1865, Stetson had returned to the east, settled in Philadelphia, and set up a fledgling hat business, making traditional dress hats as well as the now famous Boss of the Plains model. Broad-brimmed, it was the perfect wind and weather hat. A hat he later began making by hand and sending to hat and clothing dealers throughout the frontier. And the rest is history. Today, Stetson felt hats are still made by hand, and that's what this story is all about. The making of a legend. It all starts with beaver and rabbit pelts, most of them bought overseas from Europe and Australia, and shipped to Stetson's fur-cutting factory in Newark, New Jersey, where the pelts are treated and the fur is shorn off and bagged, then trucked to Danbury, Connecticut. Danbury used to be known as the hat center of the United States because of its high concentration of hat-related companies. That was back in the 1800s. But as recently as the early 1900s, there were no less than 26 hat factories operating in Danbury. Nearly everyone worked in a hat company, very often starting at 12 years of age and working all their lives. Many of these people had strong Irish and Italian roots in this part of the country, many with an ingrained sense of pride and loyalty. Once in Danbury, the different types of rabbit, beaver, and hare's fur are sorted by color and quality. The finer quality bodies will contain a greater proportion of beaver fur. Here, the fur is being processed through a mixer for proper blending. The blended fur is then hand-fed into a blower, which separates the fur from the hair and impurities. The cleaned fur is now ready to proceed to the mill room, where the fur for each hat is first individually weighed to make sure all the hat bodies are uniform in weight. Here, the fur is being transported into what is called a former, where it's sucked into an inverted ice cream-type cone that is approximately 30 inches tall. This loose fur forms the first shape of a hat body. The cone is then carefully wrapped in burlap in order to protect it in the initial shrinking process, since the slightest mark on the body at this stage could remain all the way to the end. Here you see a durable perforated cone being placed over the forming cone to hold everything in place as it's dipped in hot water. This dipping is actually the initial felting step. The body can then be slipped off the cone so it can be thoroughly inspected for any imperfections. The hat bodies are wrapped in burlap and placed as a roll in a hardening machine, where the pressure from the rollers continues the felting and shrinking processes. Now the shrinking bodies are prepared for what is called wetting down, another of the many steps required for felting. And these wooden rollers further shrink and reduce the bodies. From wetting down, the bodies are placed on the A machine, which has a long apron running through it with a series of rollers. Hot water in the neighborhood of 160 degrees Fahrenheit soaks the bodies as the rollers squeeze them against the apron. From the A machine, the bodies travel to the color room, where they're dyed with the use of acid dyes. This process requires many hours in order to ensure proper coloring. Each dye lot is carefully inspected by hand and reviewed a minimum of 4 times during this important process. The bodies are then placed on the B machine. More hot water, more rollers, more shrinking to the required western or dress hat size. At this point, the brim takes on its first shape and is stiffened through a shellacking process. In some cases, the shellac has to be thinned out to the proper strength, since Western hats require more stiffening than dress hats. The cone-shaped body is now processed into a rough hat shape. This tipping operation stretches out the cone-shaped tip or crown into a rounder shape. A similar brimmer does the same thing to the brim. Tipped and brimmed, they're now wet blocked into their final shape. Then, after they've dried, the bodies are steamed and readied for their final inspection. An inspection by people who have been trained many years in their responsibilities. The bodies are now ready to begin their journey to either Guelph, Ontario, Canada, or St. Joseph, Missouri. When they arrive, they're brought into the body room. It's important to remember that every hat goes through as an individual unit, requiring individual attention, from first felting to last finishing. In the body room, every hat is ticketed according to individual style, quality, brim dimension, and even hat size. Then the hat bodies are individually blocked. Each is put into a blocker and steamed, making the body pliable so it can be formed. There's a different block for every style and every head size. The hats have now been blocked to their final size. The next step is to press a shape into the bodies through the use of a heated hydraulic mold. The brims are wet as they're slipped into the brim plating machine, and the valve set and flattened. Then finished so they'll hold their shape. In order to finish the crown, a technique called crown pouncing is used. With pouncing paper, much the same as common sandpaper, the excess fur is removed from the hat body and a smooth finish emerges. Despite advances in machinery and automation, a hat is still largely the product of craftwork. Here you see the brim jigger, also referred to as a brim pouncing machine. It's a procedure that adds to the luster and finish. Now the crowns and brims are powdered and greased. The powder fills in the fur fibers and brings out the natural color of the felt. Dirt and excess powder are then removed. At this point, the hats are ready to be trimmed with leather, lining, and a hat band, each adding to the hat's individual style. The leather cutters trim the band to its proper size. And then it's backstitched and sewn into the hat. One of the most important steps in the finishing process is the flanging of the brim. Whether it's a sharp tilt or a slight slope, the flanging machine puts just the right amount of heat and pressure on the brim. And when the hat emerges, the brim is cool and stiff and will hold its shape. Individualized for individual tastes. Exterior hat bands are created and tacked into the hats. Linings are put into place. Pins or feathers are added. Dress hats receive a similar treatment. And the hats are about to be boxed. But first, they're given a final inspection to ensure that they embody the fine workmanship that entitles them to bear the Stetson name. Stetsons are handcrafted, with every hat individually handled 43 times from start to finish. The making of a Stetson is a very precise, painstaking, handcrafted art. More than 120 years of experience in the hatter's craft is in every Stetson made.
Now the years have passed and the West has won. The tales are told and the songs are sung, but there's one thing that'll never change. Born in the West on the open range, the legend still remains the same. A cowboy wears a Stetson.
Stetson has been covering the heads of America's cowboys for over 120 years. It's a colorful fragment of the past that continues to wear well into the present.
America grew up